Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Political Vigilante. Call-in guest here, public advocate in New York, Nomiki Konst. Nomiki, thank you for taking time out of your busy campaign schedule to talk with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, and hopefully next time we'll be able to look at each other eye to eye.
Well, right now there's a photo I took from your website of you at a podium speaking truth to power, I would assume. So why don't you tell everybody, first of all, what this position is, because I don't think a lot of people outside of New York City know what the position is, and
Right.
tell us why you're choosing to run.
Sure. So the position is called the Public Advocate of New York City. And it's not just people outside of New York City who don't know what the job is. A lot of people in New York don't know. And it doesn't mean that they've never heard of it. I think the position is a fairly new position. It is something unique to New York. It was originated in the early 90s, with the first public advocate being a consumer advocate named Mark Green. And we've only had 4 public advocates. So each public advocate has basically made the position kind of given their own flavor. But if you really go back to the charter, my interpretation of the position, and I think this is an explanation as to why I'm running for this position in particular, is that it's supposed to be the watchdog of New York City. The role of the public advocate is to be the watchdog on the city council, on the mayor's office and other agencies, to investigate problems, to advocate for issues that really represent marginalized communities and unrepresented communities, and push the platform on so many different issues. And I think, we all know the crises that we're facing today in globally. It's not even just New York, but how important New York is when we talk about income inequality, because we have the worst income inequality in the country at the worst point in history. So there's so much more we could be doing and really pushing back on our electeds. The way that I look at it, it's supposed to be someone who's independent of political machines, of special interest groups. And unfortunately, I think there's a common interpretation that this office has become a stepping stone for higher office, or a place where, termed out councilmen go, because, we have term limits there. But I see it as something that has to be inherently independent so that it's actually properly used. And that's why I'm running. That's
great, and it's cool that the city of New York actually has this, because I would assume then this is where citizens can just contact that office and say, hey, these things are happening, or I got whatever their issue may be, and then you would then determine how to address it, or which department within the city of New York to take it to?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously, there are constituents who have their city councilmen and women who represent them on a lot of issues, and they have state senators and assemblymen. And there's the question of, is it like the city or the state or the federal government? That's always a big question. But I think the public advocate is there to apply extra pressure. So if there is a problem in your community, and say your city councilman is not doing anything, or it hasn't been properly looked into or advocated for by any of the lawmakers that represent you, the public advocate has the office that they can really push it further. Furthermore, there's investigative powers. There's the ability to hire outside counsel if there's a real problem and you have to file a lawsuit. Housing is a huge issue in New York. 1 in 8 New Yorkers live in public housing. That's almost the size of Boston. That our New York City public housing is decrepit. There's lead poisoning issues. And really, the public advocate is the perfect person to be pushing up against why that's happening and solving it, and putting the pressure on the city and because there's a federal attachment to funds when it comes to public housing, also on the federal government to take this very seriously, because that's just one aspect of a health crisis that has occurred in housing that represents so many New Yorkers. So that's something uniquely that the public advocate can do as an example.
So how much of this getting involved is motivated by, I think it was last month, you put on Twitter the fact that you had been purged from the voter roll in New York City, which I believe has happened again. It happened in the last primary, right?
Yeah. It wasn't motivated by that at all. I mean, it's a frustration. I have been a long time advocate for reforming our voting systems in New York. They're incredibly complicated. There are multiple voter registration deadlines that are confusing. It's the worst in the country. I sat on the Democratic Commission that addressed New York having the worst voting rules in the entire country, and it's a Democratic state. The deadlines are outrageous. The systems are outrageous. The Board of Elections is complicated between the city and the state. I mean, it's designed so that it makes it hard, not just for voters to vote and supports incumbents, but it's also really hard for the systems that are supposed to process this. So like, I was actually registered and I got a letter in the mail from the Board of Elections confirming I was registered at my new address. And yet when I went to the polls, they didn't even tell me what table to go to in this letter. I was not there. So, you know, as I was talking to the Board of Elections, they were like, it seems like there's a processing issue here. And that's, you know, when you have multiple registration deadlines and this confusion and you don't make it simple, it also makes the process of handling all that information really complicated. So, you know, I'm a firm believer in consolidating all those deadlines, having same-day registration, pushing the state government to do what they are capable of doing in reforming the laws, but then also pushing the Democratic Party for the Democratic primary to move their deadlines because they have the power to do so. That's something I'll do as public advocate, without a doubt. That wasn't my motivation to run, but it definitely, you know, lit me up a little bit.
Let me ask you this. So you've worked within the Democratic Party for a while here. Do you think that party can be reformed and can put an actual progressive as the nominee in 2020?
I mean, those are two separate questions. Very, very distinct questions. I will say that the Democratic Unity Reform Commission that I sat on for what is now over about 2 years, the reforms that we put out in our report, not all of them were passed, but, you know, of what was passed, it's the most extensive amount of reform the Democratic Party has ever had in the history of the party at once. So that was huge. Doesn't mean that we are all the way. I mean, I wish we could have gone further. I wish we could have gone further in the commission. I wish that the Rules and Bylaws Committee had gone further. You know, and I'm not just talking about superdelegates because that's what everybody knows, but I'm talking about weeding out the inherent corruption, the legalized corruption that exists within the party that prevents progressives from getting elected from the local level all the way to the national level. I think that we need more transparency. I think we need to ban conflicts of interest in the party. The consultants should stop playing a role in the decision-making of the party, because when consultants are playing a role in the decision-making of the party, they're going to go for the candidates that can raise the most money, and the candidates that can raise the most money off of large dollars tend to be more corporate. So if we want real progressives, we have to change the systems in which we elect our lawmakers. And I hope that we can elect progressive, but I think we still have some work to do.
Yeah, because I mean, the limiting of the superdelegates, or you know, how the phrasing of the DNC website or something is like limit their influence, but they're still there. The Republican Party has 0 superdelegates.
Well, the Republican delegates, they actually have a form of the superdelegate. It's just structured differently. So that's something that's often confusing and people don't get. Listen, I mean, we have not. I don't want to be distracted by the superdelegate issue. It's very, very, very important, and I'm so happy that we were able to eliminate superdelegates on that first ballot, because just to put this in context, since we've had the modern day primary system, we've never gone to second ballot. The only time it's gone to second ballot was when we had a completely different structured Democratic Party and we didn't have primaries, when it was just a bunch of men in a room deciding. I mean, it's still kind of that, but like, they didn't even have like elections. It was just, you know, let's go together at a convention and like bribe people. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the superdelegates are incredibly important, but that's not going to win us all the elections. What's going to win us is when we start digging into the weeds. It's a sexy issue because people understand it, but it's the systems, it's the inherent conflicts of interest within the party that are blocking progressives from getting elected at the local level all the way to the national level. I live in New York. I live in Queens County, New York. The Queens County machine is notorious for announcing last-minute meetings at a diner and making decisions on behalf of the entire party, in which they get to anoint, legally, a candidate on the Democratic Party line if there's a special election. And if you know New York, you know special elections happen all the time. I'm in a special election, right? Mm-hmm. So this is the kind of real work that needs to happen. And so I always ask people to go even further. Superdelegates are huge. Absolutely. But it was something that played a big role in Bernie not getting elected. And I understand why people are angry. I was on Bernie's campaign. Trust me, I get it. I was fighting against superdelegates for a very long time. But it's not the only thing. And fixing the superdelegate problem does not fix all of our problems. In fact, it's an extraordinary example and an extraordinary situation which brought us Donald Trump. So I'm not negating it, but we got to do more than superdelegates.
So then all these problems that you lay out, how can this be fixed? Because for me, from where I'm standing, the clock is ticking on the environment. They've released that study that if we don't do drastic measures by 2030, it's too late. So we have 11 years, and we're going to sit here and quibble over all these little incremental changes within this massive party that gets a lot of corporate funding that goes out of its way to either smear or buy progressives. How can it even be changed at all?
Well, so the DNC doesn't oversee legislative races. It doesn't oversee local races. So this is why it's really important to get involved at a local level, to take over your county committees, to run for local office, because we're seeing it across the country. Progressives are getting elected in a lot of ways and shocking the system because those systems have never been challenged before. So if you elect somebody to be the public advocate of New York, that's a progressive, because there's a real path in New York City because of our campaign finance laws, you have the real opportunity to push back on climate issues and push bolder in the largest city in the United States. That's huge. Now imagine duplicating that in every single community, and suddenly you're pushing a narrative and going further rather than hyper-focusing on a presidential. I urge people not to focus too much on presidential. It's important, but that's not how our government is structured. The Koch brothers were able to attack us because the Democrats were so focused on presidential that they weren't focused on local, and the Koch brothers invested in every single state legislature in the country, even in Democratic legislatures, to gerrymander, to buy off lawmakers, because they knew they could take it community by community and dismantle the Democrats, their control. And so I think it's happening already. We're seeing it. And when you elect progressives, suddenly climate is more important, and it's on the table. I'm hoping, because I live in New York, which is much more progressive in voter registration, that I can take the message and amp it up and make it bigger and bolder, so that no matter what happens in this race, the narrative is transformed in New York, that we're not getting bogged down in silly little Band-Aid fixes. And we're talking about, okay, $15 minimum wage is now it's a national trend, it's happening nationwide, but, we're past that in New York. You can't survive off a $15 minimum wage. We're going to start at $30 an hour, and that's going to happen by next year, not in 10 years, and it's going to be adjusted with inflation. Let's go bolder. We have to actually do this. When it comes to climate justice, that's an economic justice issue. That's a social justice issue. The people who are hit worst by Superstorm Sandy in New York, they're the ones who lived, in a lot of public housing in different parts of the city, and they still haven't recovered. So, we have to go much further than what's on cable news and what's, fun to debate. We have to go past mandates. And I think that's what happens when you run locally.
Well, that's good to hear. I like your perspective on that. I know you're running out of time because you have a busy schedule. So where can people go to learn more about you or to get involved with your campaign?
Well, my website is nomikikonst.com. And we are gathering names for volunteers. And of course, any contribution would be very, very helpful, because we are just building a grassroots army right now. There's no big business. We can't take corporate money, but I would never take corporate money to begin with, or LLC money, or any independent expenditures. We're doing this in a very grassroots, local way, very targeted, talking about the issues. So you can go to my website, and we'll be unveiling our platform very soon, and I'm excited to share it with the world. And you can always tweet me too.
Awesome. Well, this is the second time I've gotten to talk to you. Once was on Voice of Progressives, and now on my show here. To everybody watching, I'll put Nomiki's website in the show notes, so please go, and whether you live in New York or not, this is the type of progressive and the type of change I always talk about. I've said that numerous times on this show, get involved on the local level, and this is how we can make some real change. So Nomiki, thank you for taking time out of your day, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon, and good luck.
Thank you, Graham.